Welcome to Coffee with Bible and Pop Culture. There is a space for everyone at this table. We are here to ask hard questions, to have honest conversations, and to journey together. We're here to talk about the things that matter most to us and to remind you that you're not alone. Our heart behind this time is to ask hard questions and to really dialogue about what we're going through. Let's engage, explore, and enjoy. Morning and welcome to this morning's Coffee with Bible and Pop Culture. We are going to give everyone just a couple minutes to get settled with your coffee. What are you drinking, Wes?
I have the Keurig special. I have no idea. My wife does a bunch of these things, so
Your wife's.
I just snagged some and then
Perfect.
grabbed them. So yep, that's what I got.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm seeing a few people coming on in here. We're going to adjust the camera again. All right. There we go. Well, we're just going to jump on in. Welcome again to Coffee with Bible and Pop Culture. And this month's guest is Wes Siler. We are so excited to dive into his article that was featured in this month's issue. It's titled Identity, Animation, and Politics. So we are so excited to spend time together with you, Wes, today and dive in a little deeper to your article. Before we get started, just for the people watching in the comments below, let us know where you're watching from. And we are sending our aloha. I'm here in Hilo, Hawaii. And Wes, where are you this morning?
Yeah, no, I wanted to say thanks so much for having me, for putting the article out there and then inviting me for this. So I live in Northwest Florida. So I kind of wish I was in Hawaii now because we've been doing hurricane cleanup after Sally came through last week. Yeah, pretty much all week and weekend we've been putting tarps on roofs and stuff like that. So I love living close to the beach. It's a ton of fun. But right now it's a ton of work. So that's what I'm living in right now. So this is fun to get to do this and talk about some other stuff for a minute. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Before we dive into your article, I just wanted to talk quickly about why we're even here with Bible and pop culture. You know, depending on how a gem is held, light refracts differently. And at Bible and Pop Culture, we engage in pop culture topics to see ideas from a new angle, to bring us into a deeper understanding. So instead of approaching a topic from, I don't want to be wrong, we're striving for an alternative of, I want to expand my perspective. And that's really what we're here to do this morning. So we invite you to engage with us in the comments. We want to hear what's piquing your curiosity, what's causing you to dig a little deeper, what's inspiring you to action, and then even the ideas that kind of make you say, and I don't know about that. We want to hear about those things too. So thank you for being with us, Wes. Thank you for your time today, and let's dive in. So again, your article was titled Identity, Animation, and Politics. Mm-hmm. And in your article, you mentioned some favorite Disney characters, Elsa, Moana, and Miguel. Yeah. So can you recap what it was about their character formation that caused you to dig a little deeper?
Yeah, so it's fun talking about things like identity and character formation with like Disney movies, right? But I feel like at some point, maybe it's just me, but I feel like I have to go to a deeper level, or I will lose my mind because it's constantly on in the background, right?
Yeah.
Now that my kids are hitting 4 is my oldest, and then my son is about to turn 3. I've totally lost. I've lost college football. I've lost, any, movies that are meant for anyone over the age of 8. Yeah. And so that's playing in the background. And the only way that I can survive in that environment is to try to put some of my thinking cap on once in a while and think about, what my kids are seeing and is there any larger theme in it? And that's really what I was exploring is even with animated kids movies, whether it's cartoon or CGI or whatever, there's still this pull of a narrative and a story and a larger theme. And maybe our kids aren't old enough to fully grasp it, but I still remember, some of the early Disney movies. I remember being a kid and watching Aladdin, and watching Cinderella, and
Yeah.
watching, as I got older, I still remembered many of those films. And I think at some level, maybe subconsciously, some of the ethics and the messaging, gets filtered in and actually becomes a part of us. It's certainly a
Yeah.
part of our culture. It's what we
Yeah.
celebrate on, when a kid has a birthday party, they, oh, I want Spider-Man, or,
Yeah.
I want Iron Man, or I want Elsa. And so what I started doing was looking at some of these movies that my kids were watching and thinking from kind of the standpoint that you said when you talked about different perspectives. Is obviously very little of what Pixar or Disney or really any of these companies that our kids spend most of their time, engaging with their products. Very few of them are Christian, in any type of way in terms of explicitly. However, some of the themes can be utilized in more of a Christian education if we're kind of
Mhm.
purposeful about it. So it's
Mhm.
kind of purposefully looking for the good in some of these movies and saying, you know what, take a movie like Frozen. Right now, there's a couple of them, of course, but there's themes there that we can kind of pull on when we talk about, for example, tradition. And both of these girls, Elsa and Anna, trying to find themselves in a larger story, trying to
Mhm.
work together with each other, having relationships and trying to find positive ones instead of toxic ones. Those type of themes definitely can be applied towards the Christian life, because we too, in the Christian narrative, find ourselves in a larger story that begins with God, continues with Jesus, and yet has a role for us. And so maybe I can take something as simple as a Disney movie that my kids have seen 30 times, 40 times, who knows?
Yeah.
And as they get older, say, the story about Elsa can very much be a story about us. And, where she's finding her identity in an icy cave or whatever, not the Holland, we are going to find our identity in the narrative of God, in
Mhm.
his story, in the Bible,
Mhm.
in what we experience at church. And that is not just a fiction, that's actually truth.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
And I think also it's an exploration, like in your article, you talked about Miguel
Yeah.
and inviting our kids to look at collectivist culture, what it looks like to really live within, families that span generations in the same home, things that, we might not be experiencing necessarily in our own
Well, yeah.
culture. But yeah.
So that's really it. Is when I started to see some of the other movies, I was like, wait a minute, this is a similar theme, like completely different setting. Right now, instead of a frozen, Nordic Iceland, now we're in Mexico. But
Yeah.
here we've got a kid who again is wrestling with his identity, his family, his culture, and the tradition. And I think what's really cool is I would say that the theme in Coco is similar to the theme in maybe Frozen 2, where the main character starts to purify some of the theme with their perspective and kind of redeem some of their family's culture that was lost. You can see that in Moana, right, where
Yeah.
she goes traveling, away from the island, and now since she's on these stormy seas, and again, it's not so much an explicitly Christian narrative, but she's looking for her identity, and she finds that along the way, and that can help us, right? Because sometimes, again, applying that towards more of the adult world is maybe we've been holding church the exact same way our entire lives, or maybe we haven't examined, some of our doctrines in Christianity in a long, long time. And maybe there's something that we could be missing. I mean, I always find that in scriptures, I read it for, the second time, and all of a sudden I get something out that I didn't get the first time. I'm like, maybe there's more that God has to teach me. And maybe our kids are going to help us, with that. Maybe they're going to give us another perspective that we could have missed. And
Yeah.
if we are too close to that, then we could miss kind of the next perspective or the next idea or the next lesson that God has for us. And so we want to embody that. We want our kids to embody that. And all we have to do is a little work to pull, some of those themes out from secular culture and make them useful for us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, if you're watching and you haven't read Wes's article at Bible and Pop bpopculture.com. Please go read it because we can just barely touch the surface of all that you wrote about.
I
So I want to
appreciate
make
it.
sure people, yeah, jump in there. So in your article, there is a quote that I wanted you to kind of expand on.
Sure.
It says, "The virtues of empathy, kindness, and gentleness have been rendered antiquated."
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of it's an unfortunate thing, and obviously, I wouldn't say that that process is complete, but I do see if we make a contrast between what we've been talking about, some of these films where there's an exploration of identity, there's an open-mindedness there, there's all kinds of themes of revitalizing tradition. When you kind of transition to the adult world, in some respects, I think we're beginning to lose that. I think that
Mm,
there's much more of a polarization. I talk about politics a lot. That's the blog and the project that I'm on deals a lot in politics, and in the political world. In my lifetime, I feel like we've gravitated to a sense of increased hostility.
mm,
We've gotten to a point where it's almost like a football game where we are just going at each other, and you're on one team and you're on the other, and there is no compromise. That's seen as weakness. We strike first, we strike hard. I mean, I talk about it a lot on my blog. It's a Cobra Kai type conservatism, to give you another reference of no mercy, just go at
yeah.
them. And really, in so many worlds outside of purely Sunday church, I think we're getting to a point where the ethics that we talk about, the things that Jesus asked us to do, are not really being applied in those worlds. It's almost like, you're supposed to love people, you're supposed to treat them with humility, respect, and kindness. You're supposed to reach them, you're supposed to be an example. Unless you're running for office, then you can say whatever you want, and it's okay for you to make fun of their family. Then it's okay for you to go low. Then you can use dirty tactics because it's in pursuit of a larger, more important goal. And so, we have these ethics that we see that we want our kids to learn, but then whenever we are operating in our own world, are we actually living by those to the extent that we could? And that's
Mm,
kind of the question that I'm asking is, have we gotten to a point where though we start to render those virtues antiquated, and maybe again going back to our kids kind of educating us, maybe we could learn from some of the examples that are being shown to them instead of dismissing them. That's kind of the idea.
yes. Yeah. And beyond Disney, oh my gosh, I learn from my kids all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's really great. So in this idea of the journey that the characters of we watch them walk through as we watch the movies, and then as you
yeah.
just talked about in as we move into our adult lives and what we see happening around. So what are a few, and then let me see, we're just gonna get the camera going back. What
Yeah,
are a few practical ways that we can listen to someone who might have a difference in belief?
that's a really good question. So, I think the first thing that we have to do is to approach those conversations with some intent to do so, some intent. And here's kind of what I would give you is we use terms like open-minded and closed-minded, right? And there's the kind of this dialectic, if you will. There's this, hey, you're either one or the other. And someone who's
Mm,
closed-minded, we tend to think is, someone who's shut off to any type of conversation that's different than them. And then someone who's open-minded is purely, receptive to everything around them. And I don't think that anyone can nor should fill either one of those very simple roles, because if you're
mm,
closed-minded, you could say, "Oh, I'm standing by my convictions," and that's great. But they're also not open to any new inputs. If you're open-minded, then I'm open to what everyone has to say. But are you hitting that point of relativism? Are you
yeah.
hitting a point where you have no convictions? And so there's this space in the middle ground. So let's discard the notions of open-minded and closed-minded, and let's move toward an engaging mind, is what I would
Mm,
say. And what
yes.
that looks like is going into a conversation aware of your convictions, aware of what you believe, but at the same time with an intent to grow those convictions, to grow those beliefs based upon new input, right?
Mm,
And
right.
I think that comes back to how we approach our own convictions first. You know, I don't want to get to a point. I mean, I've got my Bible here, and I'm still, I've been a Christian now for 20 years, and in those 20 years, I don't feel like I've learned everything that God has to teach me. Not even close.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned some important truths that Jesus loves me, that He died for my sins, that I will be with Him when I die. There are these core truths. But then when it comes to, what was it like for Abraham, when he was first meeting
Mm.
God, and the struggles with his son Isaac and having to give, like, what are the ethics of that? Oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
still confuse me. Still confuse me.
Yeah.
We look at the Old Testament, and there's these parts where these people get stamped out, and why did God, order His people to do that? There's still so many questions that I have that I wrestle with, and the biggest thing too is that God can speak in so many different ways, right? And I don't want to just say that He can only speak in one specific way or one specific person. So maybe He has a lesson for me in a place that I didn't expect. And so I got to
Mm.
be open to that, but not to the point where I'm going to turn my back on things that I know in my heart are true. And so there's this kind of give and take. I'm open-minded about some things. I want to hear what someone has to say, and I hope they want to hear what I have to say. But then on other things, I'm going to stand by convictions. And we just have to be clear about what those convictions are. And that opens space for a conversation for somebody. So
Yeah.
I'd say that's the first big step.
Yeah. That's really good. And I've heard you talk about too, like, humanity is complex. Yeah.
Yes.
And, where there has to be a common ground that we can come to in understanding what that
Yeah,
means.
absolutely. There's a former CIA analyst, I think she was, and she talked about how in her years working for the intelligence agency, she encountered so many different people of different religions and cultures and countries and nationalities, and everybody thinks they're the good guy. That was her take. It's like, from all the interviews and interrogate everything that she did, everybody
Yeah.
thinks they're the good guy. And so if
Yeah.
I'm going to interact with someone who's completely different from me, whether they are atheist, whether they are, Muslim, whatever it is, right? Like, be a Satanist or whatever, I'm going to approach that conversation knowing that they believe that they're the good guy, that what they're doing is right. And I don't expect someone like that to completely flip just because they happen to meet me or talk to me or hear my take, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I can give them something to think about. Maybe I can say, okay, this is where you're at. You're at a point where, say, as a Muslim, you don't really believe that Jesus was the Son of God, but you do believe He was a good prophet. Okay, well, maybe we can talk about that. Maybe I can show you some scriptures where Jesus actually claims to be God, and we can see where that, what you have to think. And maybe you're going to challenge some things in my faith that I haven't looked at, some weak points in my area.
Yeah.
We both kind of go back and we think about it, and maybe, that kind of opens you up in that step, because, I didn't come to where I'm at in my faith overnight, and I can't expect someone else, to make radical shifts in their life overnight just because. And
Yeah.
so there's kind of, again, there's a give and take there. And I've found so many times that in that space, God really the Holy Spirit can exist, and God can be so purposeful and work on people in ways that I would never expect. It certainly happened to me. And so that's how I approach it. Is I approach someone just because that they say that they are different than me. There may be a whole backstory there that I don't understand, but God knows what it is. God knows what this person needs to hear way more than I do. And He knows what I need to hear, what I need to work on. And so I'm going to pursue Him in that conversation. It's the same way that Jesus did with whatever it was, Pharisees, disciples, Romans, whoever it was. I'm going to approach it with that same type of intentional humility, but purposeful engagement that I hope I can benefit from.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that intentional um, engagement. So good. Um, we're just going to let you get the camera back on here. So we're just going to hang out. We're having some technical difficulties, but hey, this is live. So that's what it's all about, right?
Like it goes
Thank
back and
you.
forth on me.
Yeah. Um, so another part of your article,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to dive into some kind of like you've been giving us a solution to this. I'm just going to read this section and then we'll talk about
Sure,
it
go
more.
ahead.
So It says, and yet that's not how mass media talks to our children. In the real world, with its far more complicated problems, how can we be given more elementary solutions than a Disney character?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think right before that, you were talking about how these characters have had to kind of wrestle with what they've seen in the past within their culture and with their families, and then wrestle with who they are as an individual and how that kind of conflicts, and then the journey that it takes to find their true identity. I think that's where you were coming from right before this comment. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong, but
no, exactly. Because, listening to these Disney movies in the background while I'm trying to like get the dishes done or whatever,
yeah,
like get a bath started for the kids. And you start to pick up on things. And I was like, first I was like, what's this movie Coco about like skeletons and stuff and like the afterlife? Like what? Like kind of almost voodoo form of Christianity. I don't know. But then as I started to pay more attention, I was like, wait, as he starts to like reconcile with his true dad and it's not the person he thought, he brings music back to his family, but in a
yeah,
way that they appreciate by, undoing some of the lies and things. And it's nuanced. And I was like, holy cow, this is good
yeah,
because we don't want to be in a situation kind of like we were talking about where we think we have all the answers, but then at the same time we don't want to give up our convictions. If you look at like that movie in particular, and he's kind of rebelling against his family, and it's easy to look for a simple answer. Well, he's just wrong. He's just wrong. His
yeah,
family's right. He's wrong, or he's just right. And youth has all the answers, and tradition is meaningless. At the end of that film, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of bringing music back is a purifying thing. But then Miguel had to learn a little bit of humility himself because he wasn't right about, who he thought was his dad, right? He wasn't right about that legacy. It had some dark aspects too. It's the same thing in these other movies with Moana is like her adventurous spirit got her to some cool places, but it also got her into trouble a few times because she was
yeah,
so strong and she had to
yeah,
learn how to work with people, like the rock's good for that. Right. So, um, but yeah, along these lines is you didn't have just a simple here's a bad guy, here's a good guy, and that's it, which is kind of
mm,
what we expect from
right,
most of just a very simple kids movie, whatever, it gets the job done. I'm actually sitting here thinking this is a great thing because it translated to our world. The debate over take statues, right? So you've got these statues, many of them to Confederates. They were slave owners, right? They were engaged in this horrible practice that we condemn today. Let's
mm,
just get rid of them, let's just get rid of them entirely, everything. And you know what? Throw John Adams in there and George Washington and TJ and everybody else with them, right? Abraham Lincoln, I've seen, his statue, attacked. Just throw it, get rid of all that tradition. Or the other side of any attack on a statue, like, is an affront to our patriotism. It's an affront to our country, and it's got to be about by some horrible, Antifa violent extremists, and it can't have any bearing on who we are. It's in the middle. It's in the middle. Let's
mm,
take a look for a second and look at some of these, these statues, some of these, relics from the past, and let's kind of engage with them on more of a case by case basis because in many cases it can be a good thing. Maybe the Confederate flag isn't the best thing to be throwing around if you're trying to promote a true sense of unity and patriotism and respect for our country. But at the same time, maybe some of these statues should stand the test of time because these were complicated people. And in many cases, they did some very good things like George
mm,
Washington, despite, being engaged in a horrible practice that we condemn. If we can have that discussion, then I think
yeah,
we're in a good space. And it still amazes me that a movie like that our kids are watching is offering a more complex and sophisticated notion than what if you turn on the news today and listen to
yeah,
the majority of commentators, unfortunately.
yeah, right. That's good. Um, yeah, I feel like I just have to sit for a second because there's so much there
Oh,
too.
you're good. You're
Yeah.
good. I kind of live in this all the time. So this is we have a live show that we do every week on Sunday nights, and we have this kind of back and forth. And I tend to have a liberal and a libertarian, and I do the conservative part, and we kind of practice this on a daily basis
Mm,
of how do we encourage this conversation? How do we encourage getting back to these norms? And I would also say is that. I think that's the true identity of our country that's being lost. Like the cocoa theme really speaks to me of trying to purify and recover, some of that
Mhm.
previous identity. And I think that dialogue has really always been part of it, sometimes more violently than others. But there's always been liberals in this country. There's always been
Mm.
conservatives, there's always been moderates and outliers. And how we deal with them, there are lessons there. I mean, I
Mhm.
look at like the founding fathers, and someone like Thomas Paine, in my mind, was clearly a liberal, someone who hated Christianity, hated any sense of tradition, hated not just monarchy, but any form of um, you know, uh, not necessarily anti-democratic, but aristocratic elements. We wanted just
Mhm.
a pure democratic flow, and he had a lot of debates there with the other founding fathers. The differences between him and, say, a John Adams or a George Washington is huge, and yet these guys all work together on the American project, of building this country. And you can see that throughout. It hasn't just been people of a single mind that have made progress, and that's what we have to recover through conversations like this. Is we've got to,
Yeah.
to dial into that spirit. Um, and it frustrates me a lot, the notion that anybody who says that must be weak, must be compromising, must be a closet liberal, or Republican in name only, or not truly conservative. And that's what we try to do in our blog, is we say, no, actually, we having this perspective puts us in the tradition and the legacy of some of the greatest conservatives that have ever existed, not in rejection of them. And that's what I want to see. Is I want to see that, make a resurrection, if you will, a
Yeah.
return to normalcy.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. So, toward the end of um, your article,
Yeah.
there's an admonition there. If we could, if only we could admit our faults, defend our strengths, and redeem our tradition, like you were talking about. If only we could pursue wisdom and understanding over hate, as Proverbs 3 reminds us.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you mind reading us that first few verses in Proverbs 3? And we're
Yeah.
gonna, if you guys have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them in the comment section. We're gonna kind of end around this idea of Psalm 3. Sorry, not Psalm 3, Proverbs 3.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we want to hear from you as well. So as he's reading, if something is coming to mind, please let us know.
Yeah, I love Psalms too. By the way, I love Psalms because it's such a great book whenever you are struggling, going through a tough time. And then Proverbs, for me, Proverbs is great when you're talking about wisdom and relationships and knowledge and all the things that we've been talking about this morning. And there's so many great parts of it. So yeah, I'll read the first few verses here of Proverbs 6. It's one of my favorites. It says, "Good friend, don't forget all I've taught you. Take to heart my commands. They'll help you live a long, long time, a long life lived full and well. Don't lose your grip on love and loyalty. Tie them around your neck. Carve their initials on your heart. Earn a reputation for living well in God's eyes and the eyes of the people. Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track." And what that means to me is those just aren't words for our kids, or words for us as we're in church. They're words for every aspect, whether we're into pop culture, whether we're making a movie, whether we are into politics, whether we are working at a university, whether we are working at Walmart, whether we're the bagger for groceries, or whatever we're doing. I think that God can speak to us. He can elevate us in ways that the world won't always understand or appreciate. But He knows what we need next every
Yeah.
time. And sometimes we don't have the strength to do it. And that happens to me all the time in my life. Is God wants me
Yeah.
to do something and I don't feel strong enough to do it. But He's a gracious God, and He's going to give you another chance. And that's one of the many reasons that I love Him so much, and I love this Christian life, is that there's so many times in my life. Let me get my camera going back here again.
Yeah.
There's
There we
so many
go.
there's so many times in my life where I hit these points of not living up to God's standards, and I make these
Mm,
mistakes. And even then, God uses that as long as we're open, like David was, like Solomon was, to feedback and to critique from Him. There's so many times where um, that will be used even for His purposes. If we let Him, even our mistakes can be used for His purpose, because He kind of says, "This is why you need to lean on me more, Wes," or "This is why you need to spend more time in Scripture, Wes. Is you weren't strong enough to pass this test. You weren't strong
mm,
enough to be gracious instead of mean. When someone
mm,
attacks you." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." And then I spend a little time in Proverbs, or I spend a little time in Psalms, and then sure enough, a few weeks later, a month later, a year later, he brings that situation again, and I'm like, this time I'm not going to make the same mistake. This time I'm gonna hold fast to God's commands. And when that happens, it's just this amazing sense of solidarity with other Christians, and humility before God, of thank you for giving me the strength to do that. And when
yeah.
we're on that journey, I really think that the opportunities, the ceiling, is unlimited. And all of a sudden, every interaction, instead of being warfare or a chance to put somebody down or conflict, it really turns into an opportunity. It turns into an engagement and a lesson, for both of us, hopefully, but certainly for us as Christians. And so that's the hope, in the project we're doing, and I see it in y'all's project. So happy to be here, and
Yeah.
thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time to, first of all, to write a great article that is so worth reading, and also just spending time with us today. And I love, the idea in Psalm 3, especially, there's so much instruction there, and there's so much we can trust in the Lord, but we have to do the hard work of doing that as well. It's not a promise that all these things are going to come, but it's a work that we have to engage in, daily on this journey.
You got it.
So, yeah, this is so good. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us. Thank you guys for bearing with us through some technical difficulties, but we got back to each other. It was so good. And I think there's some comments that I'm seeing come up that I think were from
Sure.
earlier in the discussion. So I think what we'll do is go back to those comments and we can
Sure.
engage with you guys. Here, one of is in disagreement, what should our goal be?
Yeah, so that really depends on the conversation. But I kind of mentioned how I think of what's the next step for me, and what's the next step for another person. And maybe we're having a goal in a conversation, and someone is also a Christian, right? But they've had a totally different life experience than me, and maybe God's shown them so many things. So a goal in that conversation would be, tell me about your life, tell me about your experience, and ultimately tell me about you. As human beings are created for relationships, and so having someone who's going to be a friend to you, that's going to be there when you need them, and vice versa, is extremely important.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, when they're giving you that feedback, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what is a goal for them, and I think about when they start saying something, I think about, if I was in that situation, what would I want to, what would I be receptive to, if I hadn't experienced something, or whatnot, or if I had. So if someone's going through a tough time, thinking about, when's the last time I experienced something close to that, and
Mm,
what helps. And I think that can make us more sensitive to answers that are truly effective, as opposed to, I get over it, or suck it up, or whatever. Maybe it's as simple as just being there with the person. Maybe it's as
mm,
simple as, just walking through them, and listening. So that could be a goal for a conversation. But you could have a conversation with, let's say, that someone who is a liberal, atheist, or agnostic, and has had a really bad experience with a bunch of Christians. Maybe my goal in that conversation is just not to be that person, is
mm.
to show them a different side of Christianity. And maybe that's very easy, actually. Just don't be a jerk. Okay, that's my goal in my conversation, is to
Pretty
listen.
sure. Yeah. There's
You know.
a new book published.
Mhm.
Oh, his name is Eugene Cho. I think he just wrote a book called
Yeah.
Don't Be.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with that. That's my goal.
Yeah.
In the conversation, the same thing is what happened with these people that kind of turns you off to Christianity? Maybe that's something for me to learn to be most effective. And it's not always going to work. You're going to have times where people just aren't open to the conversation. But going back to something you said, which is God wants us to play our role, because you get to a point where, hey, we really can't go any further, than this, because we're going to touch a nerve, and we just kind of let that lie. And then I'm going to pray and I'm going to trust God and be like, I hope that you either bring me back into this person's life, or you reach them through somebody else or another way, that I don't understand. But the whole time is doing that for ourselves too. Is like, did I do that right, God? Did I do, what you wanted me to do? Did you have something to learn? And there's so many lessons here that we could probably spend hours talking about, of all of us. Like I think we were talking before we went live about Eastern folks who have become Christians. There's a couple of books. One's called A Guide for the Perplexed, and it's a former Buddhist who has become a Christian, and he approaches Christianity totally different. And now, the resurrection, yep, got it. That's easy. Like, he didn't have any problem with that. That's easy. But the authority of God, oh, that's different. He's the only God. Ooh, that's tough for me. That's a whole different conversation than someone who is, say, a Muslim, who has, no problem with one God. Like, yep, his name is Allah, and he's got all the power. They get that part. But then this notion that Jesus, was able to resurrect, that's totally different for them. So,
yeah.
No, it's those lessons. Those are the goals. It's kind of picking that up, because the next time you have a conversation with, a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever, you can kind of like pick out some of those common themes and learn what responds to it. I mean, I had just kind of being open with you, is like, I came from a tradition as a Southern Baptist where I had a strong belief in the Bible, and I kind of thought it was very contained. And then when I started to interact with other Christians, they showed me other parts of the Bible, because we spent a lot of time focused on the New Testament, and then when I started to interact with Jews or Catholics, or other, other forms of a belief in the word, they showed, like, on the one hand, I want to say, hey, listen, we got the gospel down. We got this, but when we talked about other aspects of the Bible, I wasn't as sharp on that, coming from my background, and that kind of helped me along the way. Right. And so when I interact with someone else, I can think back to, well, why did that work? And I think back to those Jews, those Catholics, those other Christian denominations. What are some of the effective things that they said to me? What worked? And it wasn't shoving it down my throat. Hey, you're wrong, and all this. It was kind of challenging some of the core notions in a relational way. So those are the tips. Those are the goals. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's about having the conversations, right? Being willing to engage in those spaces, and be honest about what's happening. I am reminded of a conversation that we had a few months ago with Pastor David Collins on here, and he said that there's, you want to see segregation, you just go to church on a Sunday morning, right? And the reality is still there. So there's so much space to journey to finding, the identity that God's created us for as an individual, and then as a culture, and then within our family units. And so we have a lot of work to do, but we have a lot of hope for that space as well. So
I mean, I guess my last comment on this would be, that should be the perspective that we inherit, I think, from the gospel. Is when I read the Bible, it's the story of, except for one guy, people who were struggling with a very serious sin nature, which is all of us, but also who have the opportunity to do good. And so, every single person, disciples included, Peter especially, you see this conflict between good and evil. Paul talks about it and admits it, but it's present through the entire book, which means that it's present in us. And so the nuance that we've talked about in these kids' movies, where Moana's got good aspects. She's got, inspiration and desire and ambition. She's also got, some things she needs to work on, learning how to work with people, some humility, that type of thing. That's all of us, that anytime you see that in any type of culture, anytime you see any type of blending, of those two things in the struggle within them, that's us. And that's ultimately what God wants us to see about ourselves, so that we turn towards him, to Christ, to the one person who overcame that struggle for us, that we could learn from him. And that's what we're trying to direct our kids to. That's the reminder for us. That's the reminder for us as we move forward. And when I see people who pretend like they've got the entire truth, the entire message, the entire like sum of knowledge, remember, Proverbs, when it tells you that no, lean on God for that. He's the only one who has that, which makes you far less inclined to smear someone, to try to like reduce them to ashes, because who are you, frankly, to do that, right? So to me, that's the perspective of an authentic Christianity. That's the journey that I think we're all on. And it's just trying little as we can to get better at it and follow him through it. So
do the next right thing, right?
Exactly. Hey, there you go. Very nice. Yeah. It's fun to pull that stuff out in the context of a Christianity. I love that. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining us. And let's just continue this conversation in the comments and on our Facebook page and Instagram. And where can we find you really quick before you have to go?
Yes. So our project is called the Burkean Conservative, Burkean, the Burkean Conservative. That's in the tradition of Edmund Burke, who is this famous Christian that we look up to. You can find that on our website, www.theburkeanconservative.com. You can see all of our interviews there. We have it with liberals, moderates, conservatives, right wing, left wing, the whole thing, have conversations like this. We're live every Sunday night, much like this. So we do this, just kind of a casual, fun show. And then we constantly host, like I said, those interviews. We put out YouTube videos. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. So we're, again, engaging, as best we can with that notion. More focused on politics, but not exclusively so. And happy to partner with you guys because we see a lot of commonality and shared goals in what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Bye.